morning. Here we are at the Cottage School with Dr. Jason Rodker, who will lead today our workshop on positive discipline. We've been doing these workshops for about 16 or 17 years, as long as the school has been in Gladstone. And so I'm very happy to have Jason joining us today to discuss it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about positive discipline.
Good.
So, should we begin?
Yeah.
Okay. So, has anyone taken positive discipline workshops or any kind of classes before? You have, right? There's a couple people new to it.
Yes.
Online, a little bit here.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this workshop actually ties in really nicely to the last Mondays on Education workshop we did. We talked about bullying, and we talked a lot about shame. I brought shame into the discussion, and I really see positive discipline as being the antidote to some of those shameful kind of feelings that kids sometimes develop that we talked about last time. Because positive discipline is all about parenting and disciplining from a place that does not create shame, but that actually allows children to feel encouraged as opposed to discouraged. So this really, I think, positive discipline really goes a long way to addressing some of the concerns we were talking about last time as far as why kids find themselves in bullying situations and become bullies and things like that. So positive discipline is a program developed by Dr. Jane Nelson. She developed the program based on the work of Rudolf Dreikers and Alfred Adler. And so without getting into too much backgrounds, one thing that I do want to say is that Alfred Adler was a psychoanalyst. So he was someone who had worked alongside Sigmund Freud and ended up developing his own branch of psychoanalysis. And the field of psychoanalysis has always been one from its beginnings which really placed an emphasis on understanding what is going on underneath the behavior. So underneath the behavioral level, what's motivating behavior? And one of the core pieces of positive discipline is really understanding what is the underlying motivation behind a child's behavior. Because if we can know what that underlying motivation is, then we can more effectively address the behavior. Whereas if we're just focused at the behavioral level and we're trying to intervene there, we're really kind of missing the point sometimes, and we're going to not be as effective in our parenting and in our disciplining strategies. So positive discipline really is a nice kind of balance to, I think, the current trends in society where we've gone as far as focusing almost exclusively sometimes on surface behaviors and intervening almost exclusively at a behavioral level. Positive discipline really serves as a nice balance to that.
So can I add
Yeah.
that most of the schools, and not just in schools, everywhere, because even when you are driving, if you get a ticket, right, you get a punishment for doing something wrong. So the other current that Jason is talking about, it's really opposite to positive discipline because it's based on punishments and rewards.
Yeah.
So anytime you see that they're using rewards, even if a sticker or a punishment, a bad grade or a ticket, that's the other line of disciplining that most of the schools and everywhere in the rest of the world, not just this country, that's what they use.
Right.
And so we're trying to change that. We have been changing that in the school for these past years, but sometimes it's not easy to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, a phrase that Jane Nelson uses is beware of what works, right? Because the reason punishment and reward has become the dominant form of discipline is because it appears to work, at least in the short term. It creates quick behavior change.
That's right.
And so we have come to equate correct behavior with learning. And actually it's not true learning. Well, it's not always true learning, So anyway, without belaboring that point, let's see. Another thing, something that I really like about also the way Jane Nelson has framed the positive discipline model, good morning, is she's kind of called attention to the actual meanings of the words that we use on a daily basis that have somewhat been lost. So the word discipline at its root means to learn. So the word discipline commonly, I think, has gotten equated with some kind of punishment, right? When we talk about discipline, often we think of consequences and punishment for something. That's discipline. But actually, what discipline means is learning. Discipline is a process of learning. So if when we are disciplining our children, we think about it that way, I think we will come from a kinder place and a more effective place, actually, in our parenting. Disciple means pupil. So the root of the word discipline, disciple means pupil. So if we think of ourselves in our role as parents, as teachers, and our children as pupils, that kind of helps us to engage in a way that will help them to learn. So one of the foundational parts of positive discipline is that it is both kind and firm. So it's really helpful. I have found it helpful and parents have reported to me that they have found it helpful in terms of balancing being kind and firm, and avoiding fluctuating, which a lot of us do sometimes as parents, fluctuating between these two states of over permissiveness and then over rigidness or harshness, right? Sometimes we begin to become too permissive in our parenting. Then we get frustrated because our child is not complying or not doing what they should be doing, and then we crack down. Oh, that's not working. So then we go to the other extreme and we crack down and we become too harsh or too rigid.
Yes.
Sorry.
Or authoritarian.
Oh, authoritarian. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So positive discipline is a balance between being overly authoritarian and overly permissive. So it's being kind and firm.
And I would add something that it takes a while to digest and to understand. If you're permissive or too permissive, permissive, let's say, then you're not being respectful to yourself. If you are on the other extreme, authoritarian, then you're not being respectful to the child. So something else that is core to positive discipline is to be respectful, right?
Yeah,
Mutually
definitely.
respectful to your child and to yourself. So if you find, it's hard to find the balance, but that's the balance that this kind of discipline tries to find.
Right. That's the respect is such an important point, that children deserve our respect. Not because they have done something we want them to do, or not because they have behaved in the way we deem appropriate, but because they are human beings and they deserve respect the same way that we do. So it is about finding a place of mutual respect.
And also showing as role models that we are respecting ourselves too.
Yes, exactly.
Because if we let them run the whole thing, right, we're not being respectful to ourselves.
Right.
And that's not a good example for them either.
Yeah. Another emphasis of positive discipline is on long-term goals, as opposed to just short-term goals of helping a child to learn, what they need, how to get dressed, today for school, which is important. It's also on achieving some of these long-term goals about raising kids who are responsible, empathic, self-reliant, resourceful, and good problem solvers. So those long-term skills that we want them to have when they're adults, right?
Yep.
So kind of like what I alluded to earlier, positive discipline teaches self-discipline without a loss of dignity. Without shame, without guilt, without kind of some of the negative feelings that sometimes come with parenting practices that are overly focused on punishment, consequences, and reward even. We often think of, and we'll talk more about this, we often think of rewards as being good, and they are good, but they don't necessarily lead to kids being self-disciplined. And we'll get into that much more as we go along. And this idea of inner locus of control also, that goes along with this whole idea of getting away from too much reward and punishment. Reward and punishment is based on an external source of judgment and an external source of control over the child's behavior. So that's not really helping a child to develop self-control necessarily. So this is about developing an inner locus of control where a child feels in control of themselves, and also able to judge for themselves whether they have done well or not. So an internal source of judgment as well. 5 criteria for positive discipline. Helps children feel a sense of connection. So if a parenting strategy we're using, or if a disciplining strategy we're using lacks a sense of connection with the child, that's not positive discipline, right? So Also mutually respectful and encouraging. So a positive discipline strategy, all positive discipline strategies are both respectful and encouraging. They're effective long-term, which we mentioned. They teach important social and life skills, which I think goes along with the long-term goals. And positive discipline strategies invite children to discover how capable they are. And I think that is so, one of the most
Important.
empowering parts of this for kids is that they begin to develop a sense of being capable, competent, and able to kind of face the challenges that they face on a daily basis.
So when we say that it's, to help to be able to do positive discipline, we need to establish that connection. So that connection is so important before the correction. So perhaps it's easy to remember that. So you are connected, for teachers, right? Because you are usually connected to your child, right, on a daily basis. But maybe you are doing something else and your child is doing something else. So, and you didn't establish the connection before you start correcting the behavior, right? So think about that when it happens, because it makes a big difference. We see that in the school. If you didn't establish that connection at the beginning of the day or before the activity or before the behavior happens, it's very, very difficult to correct anything. In a positive discipline way. Of course, if you put punishments of rewards, or rewards, the kids, react right away. Yeah, but that's not effective, right?
Question, is your points printed out somewhere, or should we copy them down?
We have the PowerPoint presentation, we've been using it for a while, so it is already posted on YouTube, on the Facebook page, but we are recording it live now, so we're going to post it. And then I'm not sure if Facebook allows you to put the attachment, I don't remember, but I know we have it in YouTube.
Okay, great.
And we can also send a link to the video by email together with the PowerPoint. And we have handouts.
And we have some handouts
Yeah.
today that we'll pass out. Yeah.
So
Okay,
you'll have all that information if you don't want to worry about taking notes, because
And thank you for chiming in. As you guys know who have been to these before, please chime in with questions, comments along the way. And people online too. You can feel free to chime in. Right? They can type in questions or right.
we have the tech here.
We have the tech here. Yeah, exactly. So for the moment, before we get too much into things, I want to give people kind of just a more of a visceral sense of kind of positive discipline right off the bat here. So this whole idea of helping kids to develop a sense of competency and feeling capable and thinking for themselves, really. That's also a part of this, which is not explicitly discussed that much in positive discipline, but this idea of helping children to learn to think for themselves as opposed to always looking to someone else for the answer. That's very much a part of it also.
Well, when they are looking for solutions, right? They're thinking.
Right. Exactly.
Actually, the other day in the school, I just had the idea, just an example, to say, okay, why don't we do this in a play? We're playing the recorder. We never do a presentation for recorder, and it's not really the goal to do the presentation, but they're doing, very well with some of the songs. I said, why don't we put one of them in the play? And then group 4 started saying, oh, no, I don't want to do it. Some of them said yes right away. Right? And some of them...
I know who said no.
I know who said no, right?
I think
So,
Sue's
and then
gonna join
they
that.
start thinking, okay, how can I get out of this, right? So they said, well, I'm just going to pretend I'm sick. I'm like, this is not a solution. This is not the best solution. So why don't we think about the solution? You don't have to do it if you don't want to do it, right? Whoever wants to do it can do it. If not, we don't even add it. It's our play. So then they were so relieved to think about that. But I don't know where they got the idea. They had to pretend that they were sick, right? That they would be sick that day. So it was so funny because they really are creative. They're very creative when they come up with solutions. We just have to be there to guide them and balance, because I said, that's really not honest if you pretend you're sick and you're not sick. So that's not really the way we want to go. And then they all understood that they really don't have to do it if they don't want to do it. It's our play. We're making the script, right? So
That reminds me of the Shel Silverstein poem about little Peggy Ann McKay who tried to stay home sick. And then at the very end of the poem, she says, today's Saturday? Oh, I'm going out to play. Remember that one?
Oh, I read that one.
It's a funny
Beautiful.
one. That's exactly what that is.
Well, then actually one of them, because what I said is, why don't you think about why you really don't want to do it? Why don't we think about that? So actually they took the time to think. You were talking about thinking. I think there is a lot of thinking with positive discipline.
Yeah.
So they took the time, and one of them said, well, I'm really afraid of doing it. And so everybody listened. I didn't say that, I was trying to see if they could come up with the answers why they didn't want to do it. And then somebody said, I'm shy. And so they started thinking about why. I said, well, the best way, is to practice always, practice, and then you would overcome. So actually we extended the conversation for, I don't know, like 20 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
But it's so important because that's the process, where they show that they have some fears.
Right.
Or
Now, what about when they don't have a choice? That's always my challenge. Like, they had a choice in that situation.
right.
I really trip up when there's something that needs to be done.
Well,
And
you
there's
can
not
take the
a
time
choice.
for training, for example,
Right.
which is what we ended up talking about, right? We go upstairs, we train, we practice, then we invite 10 parents, and you play the recorder, then we invite 20. I'm just saying that with the recorder situation and the play, but the time for training is another tool, actually, taking the time for training the child to do something, make a plan, make a chart. There are so many tools. So we'll talk about specific issues, right?
I do, it's funny because, so tomorrow, in preparation for what we're doing tomorrow, I need to leave the house earlier. And I already have trouble getting here on time as it is. So I'm trying to think to myself, how am I going to get out of the house earlier tomorrow? Especially because mine is having trouble going to sleep at night. She's so excited about reading, I can't get her to go to bed at a reasonable hour. So, therefore, every morning I'm waking her up and she's tired. So I'm sort of stressing out about it. But I have found that by speaking to her ahead of time,
Yes, that's the
And
time
saying-
for training.
I really, like, tomorrow, Mommy has this going on. I really need us to leave the house early if we can. Maybe we'll do breakfast in the car or something like that to get going. And I found that just that prep time has always helped. And then when she's able to follow through on it, thank you so much for helping me get out of the house on time. And then she's so proud of herself for, helping and
Finding a way to
I-
help with
Yeah.
the situation.
yeah, exactly. Just reinforcing that, I appreciate, that she put in that extra effort this morning so that we could get out of the house. So, yeah,
That's great. Yeah, so you can start making the plan today.
my backup was the non-positive discipline. It was the chocolate chip.
The reward.
In a pinch. Chocolate chip, yeah.
I'll give you a chocolate chip if you just get dressed.
That is
But-
very effective. We said that in the short
Yeah, in
term.
the short term. It's
It's
effective,
very
yeah.
effective.
But I will be preparing ahead of time, so that will be my last resort.
Oh my God, I'm exhausted from preparing and planning. It's all I do. Talk, prepare, plan, and he still doesn't do what I want him to do.
Well, maybe
anyway.
you need to let him do some of that,
It's
right? We'll talk
exhausting.
about that.
Yes, okay.
Because to make
That's
them
why I
feel
wanna talk too much
powerful
now.
and encourage, they need to do 50% of that.
I told you what Leo said to me last year, I think, at the workshop. He said, well, I don't do what you say because you don't believe in rewards. I don't believe in rewards. I'm like, oh. No,
I
shouldn't
think
you be
at that
rewarded
age-
just because you feel good about yourself, right?
I think at that age and with his understanding, because you've been coming to the positive discipline workshops for how many
I
years now?
have been slugging away at this, and I still haven't mastered it. Some of the concepts I really have, and I really think they really, really work. There's no doubt when you hit that knack, but I
Yes.
don't always hit the knack. And I see it here. I see how you
Yeah.
handle Leo sometimes when we're talking. You're much more firm than I am when I talk, right? I don't
So-
have that knack.
Well,
It's
not-
like you said, it's
Well-
that permissiveness because I don't want to yell. But then after the 5 or 6 times, it's like, the high volume starts to come.
First of all, it's more difficult for a parent than for a teacher, if the teacher has a training, right?
Right.
Because you're emotionally involved with the child. We are too, but not as much as the parent is, right? So it's more difficult. And then this is very hard to understand because we were not raised this way. Because you leave the school and everything else is not positive discipline.
Yeah.
right? As I say, you get a ticket if you don't have your seatbelt on, right? So that's punishment, and it's very hard to understand, and then to apply it is another story, right?
And also, not all the tools work for everyone. So
That's
that's
right,
why
right.
there's so many
Yeah.
tools. And as we go today, you'll see there's a lot of tools.
Yeah.
So yeah, what works for you might not work for me, and vice
Right.
versa. And in certain situations, it might work for you and not others. So that's why it's good to have a bag of tricks. You know, exactly.
A bag of
So
chocolate chips.
Let's talk.
Family cards, right?
Yeah. There's 50 tools in this card deck right here.
There's got to be one
We'll
for
get,
me.
We'll get through some of them.
Just one.
So let's talk about one right now. Let's talk
Okay.
about one that will help kids to develop problem-solving ability and a sense of competence and thinking for themselves about solutions, developing solutions for themselves. I need 3 volunteers. It is not very revealing, so I wouldn't worry too much about having your voices be on camera. You're just going to be reading off cards, basically. I need one person to be the child. One person to be the child. All you're going to have to do is sit there and listen. So, okay.
That's the easy job.
He grabbed that one quick. He was like, yeah, I'll do that. And then I need one person willing to read one set of cards and one person willing to read the other set of cards. Okay. And you'll be the telling person
Okay.
who wants to. Okay. And you can be the asking person.
Okay.
So this is going to be a little exercise on the value of getting curious and asking questions. Okay, so when you're trying to get a child to follow through with some kind of instruction or demands, the value of asking questions and really being curious. So Jane Nelson calls these curiosity questions. So you're asking with the intention of really being curious about what the child's actual response is going to be. So not asking questions expecting a certain kind of response, but really getting curious to know what is the child thinking, feeling in this moment, and what might the child do if given the opportunity to develop a solution for him or herself. So as you read through the cards, I would like the child, but also the two of you reading, to really stay in touch with what your emotional reaction is during this activity. So I'd like you guys to go back and forth, asking and telling. So you'll do one, and we'll go back and forth. Okay?
And you have the asking or the Chara has
You have the asking, right?
asking curiosity questions. Then? Is that the set?
Yes, asking curiosity questions. Yes.
So, honey, what is your responsibility when you are finished playing with your toys?
So you guys are addressing the child as you're reading.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
Go brush your teeth.
Oh, okay. So I see the 2.
Telling.
Telling.
Right. For now,
Telling.
yeah, exactly. Yes, we know. These will all be the telling. These will all be the asking. Yeah, right.
Okay. How can we communicate more respectfully?
Don't forget your coat.
What can you do to catch the bus on time?
Do your homework.
What did we decide about what to do with our dishes when we have finished eating?
Stop fighting with your brother.
How can you and your brother solve this problem? Can I have this card? Put this on my refrigerator.
Put your dishes in the dishwasher.
What's your plan for doing your homework?
This is me. Hurry up and get dressed or you'll miss the bus.
What are you taking so you won't be cold outside?
Stop whining.
What do you need to do so your teeth will feel squeaky clean?
Oh my God.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
a
good
good
one.
one. That's a big
So
one.
the other one, the telling was go brush your teeth, right?
Yeah,
And so
I think they're out of order maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not matched up exactly.
The hygiene questions.
Pick up your toys.
And then we're back to what is your responsibility when you finish playing with your toys,
Okay.
with your toys?
So, as the child in the situation, listening to the asking and the telling, what did you notice in terms of your kind of reaction to hearing those?
Barking and inquisitiveness,
Okay.
just off the top.
Right.
I think our real life experiences, we're doing a lot of both.
Mm.
You know, we might be hustling and barking unnecessarily, and so it'll raise awareness to knock that off.
Mm.
But oftentimes we just ask these probing questions when we're driving around or driving here or driving home or, you know, on the weekends, and so it elicits a response and thought, which from the child, which is part of what we want.
Yeah.
Because we can't hurt.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're sparking their thought process.
Yeah, totally.
And cooperation too.
Yeah.
And right, exactly.
Cooperation,
Right.
because then
right.
you're inviting them to cooperate with the situation.
Yeah.
Right. They're
Getting a buy-in.
right. In answering one of those questions, it automatically puts them in cooperation mode.
Yes.
Because they're thinking about how to do exactly what you're asking them. You know. Right. Whereas the telling statements don't require any thought on your part.
Yeah, you're the boss.
There's no thinking process necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the question also, which we were talking before, is the feeling behind the question also is very, very important.
Mm.
Because that will tell, you know, it depends on how you ask the question, and then the child will perceive exactly what you're feeling. So if you say,
Yeah.
can you read one of the questions that you read before, but not in a kind way? Because there is a big difference.
Yeah, like a
You know?
condescending way.
So,
How can we communicate more respectfully?
right?
Yeah.
So we are demanding. So we
Yeah.
have to be careful with that because I notice, you know, it depends on how you use the tools too. So the feeling, it's super important. And for us to connect with our good feelings, there is also a tool, a technique, you know, taking a positive timeout that we were gonna talk later. We don't have to talk now, but
Yeah.
I think that part about the feeling is super important when you are talking to the child. You have to really think of how you're feeling. If you're feeling frustrated, and then you have to take a time for you to calm down, then do that first before you ask the question, because otherwise it's not gonna be positive discipline.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to keep that present, yeah.
Yeah. And also for the people who were doing the reading, what was it like to be reading the telling statements? Did you notice any kind of emotional reactions you had as you were doing the telling?
Well, it's funny because the telling is how my husband normally deals with things. I'm sort of in between.
And Jeremy, you're not listening.
Yeah, I know. I'll say, could you please go brush your teeth now? It's time to brush your teeth. Time to get ready for bed. Could you please? Like that's usually how I communicate.
Mm.
However, I do feel like I get ignored, so I'm asking several times.
Yeah.
And you're telling her, even if you say, could you please, you're
Yeah,
telling
yeah.
her.
Right,
Could
it's
you-
still telling.
That's not quite a curiosity question. It's a
Right.
question, but it's not a curiosity question.
Well, when I heard those questions, it made me they were more it was more insightful in the way that I think it would sort of stop her, like it would make her pause and answer the question instead of maybe ignoring me or I can see the positive because when I'm asking her to go brush her teeth, like, hey, it's time to get ready for bed, could you please go brush your teeth? She ignores me. Time to go brush your teeth. Could you please go brush your teeth? It's getting late, you know, and then 20 times later I'm like, go brush our teeth.
Well, the other principle I will say, and we keep talking about that with the teachers here too, is that if you're repeating yourself, it's not working.
Right.
So you need to change the plan.
Yeah.
I will say this, actually, they sell them on the website. You can have this and look for another tool. Because if you're repeating yourself and it's not working, just make sure it's not going to work. It's not working.
Right.
The child is not listening, or you're not understanding that saying the things, you know, the same thing 3 times, it's more than enough. I mean, more than enough. One time, of course, so you tell them what to expect. The second time, okay, a reminder. Then change the plan, do something else because it's not working, and then you start nagging.
Yeah.
Right?
Usually what would happen is we would sort of make the consequence, well, now it's really late, so we can't do books tonight. Mommy won't read to you. And then she's really upset. And in a way, like, I thought we were doing okay by that because it felt like the natural consequence. Like, bedtime is at X time. Teeth weren't brushed, so, you know, now we're going to go brush our teeth, but there's no time for books.
Mm-hmm.
But actually now...
Time is a tough
I
one.
think that
No.
actually,
The whole time concept,
They don't
I
get
think, even
It
though they're
depends
getting
on-
older.
well, it depends on the age. It does depend on the age,
Yeah.
you know. But actually we'll talk more about natural consequences, obviously. It's a big part of the program, you know. But that could very well be a natural consequence that you're talking about.
Right.
Now, sometimes it might take a couple of nights of the upset. It might take 2 or 3 nights of them being upset before
Right.
they fully learn and realize, okay, this is really how it's going to be. Before they begin to kind of follow through. But right, that sounds like it
But
could.
in natural consequences, where, for example, you tell them, okay, don't forget to get your coat, right? You're telling them, you're not asking them. But if you don't say anything and they don't take the coat, they're gonna feel cold. So that's a natural consequence. They feel the cold. Natural consequence for not brushing her teeth would be that the next morning her teeth will hurt, let's say, which is not gonna happen.
No.
Right? That would be a natural consequence. What you're talking about is a logical consequence to the situation, which actually Jane Nelson is trying not to use the term anymore, logical consequence, just because it's very hard to understand the difference and to understand the difference in between logical consequence and punishments, which is the question that you've had many times, Laura.
Yeah, because sometimes
They feel like
I'll
a
ask-
punishment.
It's not. There's no natural consequence to some of the things I talk to you about, right?
That's right.
So I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Or sometimes
Right.
there is no logical consequence because sometimes there is not a logical consequence that you can allow
Right.
that to happen, right? For example, a logical consequence of, if, a natural consequence of not listening to you and then crossing the street and then, that's a natural consequence if you're not listening at that moment. But sometimes there are no logical consequences that will sound like consequences. They sound more like punishments because they're not related. You cannot find a logical consequence. So she's talking more about solutions now
Okay.
than logical consequences. And in that, you can invite Leah and say, okay, let's make a plan for the nighttime. Let's find a solution. And she can make like a picture, schedule. So that instead of the time, like Laura said, for kids it's so hard to understand, she will follow the picture chart that she can
Yeah.
make.
I like that. She'll love that idea.
For people who have some experience with positive discipline, this is probably making more sense, this conversation we're having about logical consequences, natural consequences. For people who don't, for people watching, for people here who don't have that much experience with positive discipline, this might not be making as much sense without the background. So let's keep going. Let's go through some of this. So because we'll get to all of this, we'll get to natural consequences. We'll get to the difference between natural and logical consequences. Okay, we've talked already. I've already mentioned about rewards and punishment. How they can be effective in the short term, but long term not so much. Let's see. Some of the reasons rewards don't continue to work, they might work initially, but then kind of lose their effect is, habituation. Some kids just kind of get used to getting it, and they don't really care for whatever the reward is as much. They've kind of become satiated, almost.
Or they want more.
Or you have to keep it, or they
The guard
habituate.
and motorcycle.
They keep increasing, exactly. So satiation would be right. They've reached their limit. They don't really need anymore or want anymore. Habituation would be what you said, which is that they become habituated to getting the 2 M&Ms. Now they need 3 or 5 or 10 or a bag.
Or the Coca-Cola
right,
stuff.
exactly. And then we've talked about the external versus internal locus of control as well. So the 4 R's of punishment. So some of the reasons why we might want to avoid using punishment is because it tends to generate these 4 R's: resentment, revenge. It invites revenge. It invites rebellion. So giving a punishment automatically sets up a power struggle, and retreat. So a child gets punished, well, they just become a little sneakier next time about how to get what it is they want, right, without getting caught or without getting the punishment. I see that especially with teenagers, I mean, probably all ages, but more recently I've noticed it with some teenagers that I work with. It's like they know full well how to not get punished, but to still do what it is they want to do,
Well, with little kids, it happens. You see the younger. It's just that I think if parents use punishments or rewards all the way until they are teenagers, then when they're teenagers, they're
It's ingrained.
It's ingrained.
Well, they've almost gotten the training
They
in
got
how
it.
to be sneaky
Yes, they do.
and how to do it without getting caught, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. My son is 3.5. He's not yet at the point where he gives himself up very easily. 'Cause he's not that good at being sneaky yet. He pretty much, but that'll run out at some point. He'll get smarter and he'll know how to sneak.
Well, if with any luck, I'll tell you, because Leo can be a little challenging, right? but he does have a conscience, and he will come
Mm.
and say something.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's when I feel I falter a little bit too. And I don't mean to cut you off,
No.
because when you're going to share and you're going to say something later, I'm like, well, what do I do now? I'm like, I get lost. But there is no consequence for me at that point, because he's telling me. So I'm thinking, okay, he gave himself a consequence already because he's been thinking about it. He feels badly about it, right?
I would just buy the whole set.
I think I need to
And
list
ask,
that.
Yeah.
and ask Leo. All right, Leo, your turn.
Take one.
Pick one up, and we'll see. Well, the mistaken, he's gonna understand the mistaken goal chart probably too.
Yeah.
And actually, Jane talks, which I was surprised, talks about sharing that with the children openly, and to start discussing the
Yeah.
emotions too, which is something that is so hard to understand, right? And develop the emotional intelligence. You know, she doesn't say that, but I know there are some exercises that you can do with kids so they understand if they are trying to get the attention, which we'll talk later.
Mm.
I don't want to move forward. I know Anne and Laura have been in so many workshops,
Right,
but I
right.
feel we can just talk. But I'm glad you go through the power.
I won't jump in anymore. I'll
So-
wait. I have a lot of consequences questions,
So-
or lack of.
I think without realizing, a lot of us operate from this idea that in order to help a child do better next time, they really have to feel badly about what happened this time. You know, that somehow feeling bad is going to help them do better next time. But from the positive discipline perspective, it's actually kind of the opposite. If a child is feeling discouraged and bad about themselves, that makes them less likely to want to do well next time, or to have the wherewithal to think through solutions. If they're feeling bad about themselves, they're gonna do one of the 4 R's that we just talked about. They're gonna retreat, or they're gonna seek revenge, or get angry and rebel. So children are more likely to do better when they feel better.
That's super important.
It's very important, and when people hear that initially, especially people who aren't familiar with this kind of way of thinking, it kind of sounds like, as parents, we're being soft, like we're just trying to make them feel good even when they don't do the right thing. It's not about not holding them accountable, and that's really important, and you'll see that as we go, I hope. The positive discipline approach is very much about holding children accountable, but knowing that in order for them to be accountable, they need to feel good about themselves. They need to feel encouraged that they can do these things. So,
I'll give one example. For example, a child misbehaves here, right? We already told what we expected, told the child and the group, right, what we expected, so then it's misbehaving anyway. Okay, let's come in this room and read a book. And if I have somebody new coming from outside that they're not training positive discipline, like the teachers here, and it's just to see that, they will think that we are rewarding the misbehavior because a child comes to take a break and read a book, for example. So it's very, very hard to understand that there is a difference there. We're not rewarding the misbehavior. We're going to follow through. We're going to talk about it. We're going to find a solution and make the child, or have the child understand, if we can, why the behavior was disrupted, for example, for the class or something. So,
right. So, we've kind of alluded to some of these already, but some of the basic Adlerian concepts that positive discipline is based on are the ideas that a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. So when you're faced with a child who is, doing what they're not supposed to be doing, misbehaving in some way, rather than view that child as simply a problem or being bad or wanting to do the wrong thing, that we approach it making the assumption that a child wants to be doing the right thing, but something is stopping them from being able to do that. The main thing being discouraged in some way. So a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. The behavior is goal-oriented, so it's, again, the idea that behavior has meaning, and if we understand what the meaning is, or what the goal motivating behavior is, then we can more effectively address that goal and help them correct their behavior. And that a child's primary goal is to feel belonging and significance. That's really foundational also to this, right? Is that a child's, from the time they're born, the main human motivation is to feel belonging and connection with other human beings, right?
that's why if you ask for cooperation with curiosity questions, or ask, in the case of Leah helping you to figure out how the morning can go easily, and then she will feel the belonging and the significance.
Mhm.
by doing that.
Right.
So
That's
it
a
makes
good
them
point.
feel well
Yeah.
about it.
Right.
Yeah, for a child to feel that they have something to contribute, that they're significant
Yeah.
in some way, that their presence would be missed if they weren't there. I think that's an experience that kids commonly don't have, especially in school in large classroom settings. In the typical kind of school setting, is that they're, you know, if they weren't there, it wouldn't make all that much difference. You know what a, you know, that's not right.
That's
I see.
awful.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a good experience for a kid to have.
No.
It's reminding me.
I might feel bad.
I saw a Peanuts cartoon, where one of the characters was describing to the other character their experience of going to school that day, and he was telling the other character, he was saying, yeah, so I went to school and I poked my head in and I called in, does anyone need me today? Does anyone need anything from me? And no one answered me, so I left. So, you know, it's like that kind of, you know, kids want to know they have something to contribute, that they're
Yes.
significant.
May I just share too that, you know, everything you're describing with this approach would allow the parent and the child to feel more calm. And when you're in that calm, relaxation, not that you're totally relaxed, but when you're in a calm place, then your mind can think more effectively
That's right.
towards solutions. As soon as you're in the stress response, less brain goes to the, or less blood goes to the brain, and you're not in a solution response, you're in reactivity
The
mode.
primitive
Yep.
brain, you're functioning.
And then you just create more chaos and drama. So,
Yep.
like, it just makes sense on every level to
Yep.
stay in this connecting, calm place and work through the solution mindset.
But the kids do know how to press those buttons,
Yes.
right? Exactly. What's going to make you be irritated?
Mm-hmm.
They know exactly, right? We know for experience. They're experts on that. So that's why I think it's important to think that if you need a timeout, a positive timeout,
Yes.
or the child needs what, you know, I say timeout because it's very common to hear that, but let's call it positive timeout because timeout also doesn't have a good connotation. So positive timeout, which Jason actually is going to talk about that too.
Mhm.
It's important to take that time to calm down, to think with our rational part of the brain, not the primitive brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then start the conversation again. So sometimes we can just write down the problem and put it in what Jane calls an agenda for the class or for the family discussion, for a meeting, a family meeting. That's another tool that we're
Right.
going to talk about.
Yeah, so in a situation like that, there's many tools you can draw on. The one you just alluded to is that you don't have to address it in the moment necessarily.
Right.
Sometimes we get caught up in feeling like for some reason we have to address it right then on the spot. But if we're not in the right mental space to do that, or if the child is not, there's really no point. We're just going to be, you know, using up our energy without a good result. So putting it on the agenda and talking about it later. Taking a cool off, you know, taking a time out for yourself as a parent until you're calm enough to address the issue. And also all of this comes back to the idea of modeling. You know, modeling I feel like is one of the foundational tools, you know. So if we expect our children to be able to problem solve with us and communicate with us in a calm way, we have to make sure that we do whatever we need to do to be calm first. And if we show them that we're willing to do that, then it teaches them that they can do that also. If they need a timeout, they can choose to take one. You know, this is a good. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good moment. I'll do quickly. I've probably done this other times. The brain in the hands model.
We've
It's-
done it in the workshop.
Yeah, you can
I
YouTube
haven't
this.
seen it.
Remember
Okay,
that.
good. So you can YouTube this also. Dan, if you YouTube Dan Siegel hands model of the brain, it'll come up. And Jane puts it in some of her books and manuals too.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the experience you're talking about. This is the brain. This is if you're looking at the brain head up front on like this. This is the brain stem. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for sleep, you know, eating, all those kind of just basic bodily signals, the things that kind of keep our body working. This is the limbic portion of the brain, the limbic center of the brain. This is memory and emotion. So the amygdala is here in the limbic center, and the amygdala is kind of our alarm center. So it triggers that fight or flight response. So when we're in a threatening situation, that's our internal alarm that goes off. And then this is the cortex. This is the most recently evolved part of our brain, both in terms of human evolution, but also as a child is growing, this is the part of the brain that is developing last. right? And so in our young kids, especially this front part of the cortex called the prefrontal cortex is very much underdeveloped and really does not finish developing until our mid-20s, so late adolescence. And this is the part of our brain that's responsible for all the problem solving that we want our kids to be able to do in those moments of difficulty. So first of all, it's important to know that this part is just not fully developed in our kids yet. So we need to have the patience to deal with that, and also to give them the tools that they need to continue to finish developing this part of the brain. One of the important things to note is that this part of the brain comes in contact with the lower two portions. So it comes in contact with the limbic center and with the brain stem. And so when this part of our brain is properly functioning, it allows us to soothe ourselves, to soothe and turn off that internal alarm. When we are highly aroused or our emotions are running wild, Dan Siegel calls it flipping our lid. We flip our lid, and we're no longer able to access these skills, these problem-solving skills that we have.
So the kids do push that,
Right,
and then they're experts on that.
right,
That's why it's important to know that we don't have to be perfect. We can't be perfect, right?
right,
And be all the time like that.
Right.
Although we try to practice mindfulness and yoga, but it will happen, right? So we have
Right.
to understand that it's good to take that time.
right. So if I'm sorry, yeah.
No, that's
So if either of us, parent or child, or spouse and spouse, but if either of us are in this state, it's not the time for problem solving and working it through. We need to find the things that work for us to get back to this state before we re-engage. So
and it's good to tell the children that to have a conversation when nothing is happening, and then to say, listen, when mom is in that stage, then this is what I will do. I will go to the bathroom, I will read a book, because then they understand. If you, for example, you mentioned the siblings, right, the fighting. So, I mean, that's very common, but they do fight to get the attention of the parents, usually. I mean, Jason can talk more about that, but usually that's the situation with siblings. And so if you agree on that, you're not going to get involved because they have to solve the problem. And that when that starts happening, they will just have to come and tell you when they're finished. And then you're going to read the book and wait.
And you could teach them that here, right? And then they'll come home. They all settled, right?
Yeah.
Usually kids
Practice
fight
with Ron and
for the
Zen.
parents.
Oh, sorry. No.
But you need to find something that you like to do that you will tell them, this is my time out, right? I'm just gonna take my time out here, positive time out, and then you come and tell me when you're finished fighting. Actually, Jane mentions one time she's driving with her kids in the back, and they all fight. Don't feel you're the only one that has kids that fight, because you will see.
no, yeah,
The baby's coming soon.
baby's on its way, yeah.
Yeah. So then she stopped the car at one point and asked them, okay, I'm not going to move, I'm not going to drive because I really, cannot drive if you're fighting. It's very stressful for me. So I'm just going to park here and you tell me when you're ready. When you're finished, then I will continue driving. Because in the car, that happens too, I'm sure, right? They find...
They're pretty good in the car, thank goodness. They're pretty good in the car, usually.
They're good in the car.
No
So if
problem
it
with
happens, then that's another way too, to say, to
Yeah.
stop the car and say, when you're finished, we can continue.
That's the tool I think Jane would call deciding what you will do.
What you will
Right.
do, that's
What
right.
you will
Yeah,
do.
that's
You can't necessarily
Yes.
control
That's
what
right.
the kids are doing, and you can spend all your energy shouting and whatever, threatening and punishing, the whole time, or you can simply decide what you're going to do.
That's right. That's super
Right.
important too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this slide the most important thing on this slide I think that we haven't already said is that helping a child to feel encouraged is not about fixing problems for them or sometimes providing solutions. Sometimes they need you to help them come up with solutions, of course, but especially if a child is old enough and they're capable of coming up with their own solutions, encouragement is not about fixing, rescuing, or protecting them necessarily. Encouragement is about being there and supporting them when they are experiencing the consequences of their actions, and then also helping them to think through what they might do differently next time. you know. So again, supporting that thinking process. We'll probably come back to this because this we often, a lot of us, this will probably come up in stories that or in questions, because we often seek to rescue our kids from their feelings,
Oh, yes.
from their failures,
That's
from their disappointments, right? And when we do that, we don't give them the opportunity really to learn how to cope with that. We end up taking too much responsibility for their consequences, you know.
And also, I think, you know, my kids are older now, and I have that tendency of trying to fix, you know, it's because perhaps, you know, I have to find solutions all day long for many things, right? But I have that tendency, and I have to stop myself, because you make them feel that they're not capable of finding the solution if you take over. So the curiosity question is like something to practice, because otherwise we have more experience and we have like almost right there the solution, right? We don't want to share that right away, because you do make them feel that they're not capable of finding that solution if you try to fix or to do everything for them. You have to keep that in mind. Yeah, I do have to keep that in mind.
It's a really
for
good point.
myself.
It's hard. It's really good point.
It's hard, but we have to, because we cannot, you know, protect them all the time, you know, so they don't get hurt, or they don't get, you know, the feelings hurt, or they don't get, you know, even sick, you know, overprotecting them too, for any situation, right? We have to make sure that we understand that they are capable of developing. If they don't know how to find a solution, you know, at least we have to believe that they're capable of developing those skills to find the solutions, right?
One thing I realized that I meant to do on one of the previous slides was to talk a little bit more about praise versus encouragement. Would this be an okay time?
Yeah, sure.
So sometimes it's hard to really. This is a difficult concept. One of the most, I know in me personally, and a lot of the parents I talk to, one of the most ingrained strategies we use is praising our kids, you know, to encourage them to do more of what we want them to do, right? To do the right thing. We use praise often. So even for parents who have gotten away from using, you know, rewards, still praising is sometimes a hard kind of habit to break. And this is a really tricky. I think it's a topic worthy of debate and discussion. This idea of praise. Because I don't necessarily think it's an all or nothing kind of thing. I think there are moments in time when a little bit of praise can be okay, but if used generally as kind of a general strategy for motivating behavior, it becomes counterproductive long term. Again, for the reasons that we've kind of already discussed.
It's like a reward. They're waiting
It is
for
a
that
reward,
external.
basically. Exactly. They're looking for that external source of judgment, you know, as opposed to developing their own sense of judgment about themselves. So.
Did you want to pass this out now or later? We need copies of this one, right?
Yeah, let's pass that out after we do this,
After.
actually, yeah. So the sheet that we'll pass out kind of gives you a breakdown of conceptually and theoretically and even scientifically the differences between encouragement and praise. That'll be good to kind of to read afterwards to kind of reinforce this idea. For the moment though, we'll use these cards, again with statements on it like we used before, to kind of get a sense of what would a praising statement be versus what would an encouraging statement be. And so I'll just pass these around. Maybe we can, without looking on the back, we'll kind of read through them and we'll take guesses as to what we think they are, whether it's a praising statement or an encouraging statement. So do you want to just kind of, we can do that, yep.
You worked hard, you deserve it. That's an encouragement.
Do we have questions or anything?
No questions. So what do you guys think? You worked hard, you deserve it. Encouragement or praise?
Praise? I don't know. Sounds
It's
like
a little
praise.
tricky.
Some of these are tricky, yeah.
To say you deserve it doesn't sound encouraging though.
One of the I'll give you guys a
Kind
clue.
of sounds like both.
Right.
One of the hallmarks of an encouraging statement is that it's focused on the process of what's happening. One of the hallmarks of a praising statement is it's focused on the end result. So you wanna read it again?
Praise.
Well,
You worked hard, you deserve it.
So the process is the work done to get to that point.
yeah,
I think it's a little contradictory, that one.
that one. Well, Jane
It's
calls
both.
that one encouragement actually.
Okay.
But you deserve it as a praise to me.
You
Right.
deserve
Because
it
you
to
are
be a
saying like
praise.
you're entitled, you know, to
Yeah.
Right.
that
That's what threw
part.
me
I think
off.
it's a little confusing, that question,
It's, well,
actually.
it actually, out of context, it is hard, especially out of context, it is hard. Because it would depend on the situation, I guess, you know.
Well, I always thought you were supposed to reference behavior, not the person, right? So you
That's
shouldn't
right.
say you deserve it.
If you say you deserve it, you are saying, okay, the result is important. You know, you deserve this.
Mhm.
You are focusing on the result, basically. So it's very tricky, that one. So
All right, skip that
it's
one.
Well,
Okay.
let's not,
I'm just
because,
teasing,
well,
I'm just
because
teasing.
part of
it's
this can be,
understand.
confusing.
yeah, exactly, it is
It's
confusing. And like I said, you know, there's a fine line, you know, so.
Yeah.
So part of it, we need to decide for ourselves. Jane would want us to think for ourselves about these things, right? So,
That's right.
So some of us think it's praise and some of us think that one's encouragement. Is that we're gonna?
we could.
I think it's a
stick with that.
combination.
It could be a combination.
Sounds like the beginning sounds like encouragement.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Word,
Yeah.
and that's what the process.
Right.
And you deserve it, I guess, like a reward or a treat. Sounds
Yeah.
going back to the reward system and the praise kind of thing.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. So if we wanted to just stick with the encouragement, we would stick with the first half of that statement. Okay.
Mm.
Do you want to pass those around and read another one?
You must be proud of yourself. Praise. Sorry.
Well, you think it's praise?
I do.
Praise. Okay. Anyone else? You must be proud of yourself.
No, that's encouragement, isn't it?
Why encouragement, do you think?
Because you're not saying you're great, you did this, you did that. You must be proud of yourself. That's the personal. Isn't that what the reward is supposed to be for the child?
Well,
It's feeling good
yourself
about
of
themselves.
what you did.
I
You must be proud of what you've done, for
Oh.
example. Or I'm just trying to think.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you're feeling the ego there, right? If you say you must be proud of yourself, you know, you're a good boy, it's basically the same thing.
Oh, because you're saying yourself.
yourself, right? Because
Oh.
you're saying, right? It sounds like
I
you're
know,
saying,
it's
oh,
funny.
you are so smart. It's like basically the same thing, right?
I'm voting. I'm going to say that it was called encouragement. Why don't you flip it
That
over
one?
and see?
That's black.
Oh, sorry. E, yes.
It is, right?
Yes. E for
Okay.
encouragement. Yeah.
You
It's-
must be
I did
proud
write
of
them,
yourself, encouragement.
So I don't
Yeah.
see that because process things are pretty easy to identify,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no process there.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. It's like the
It's like
result. You
there's
must
a
be proud of
Right. There's
yourself.
a predecessing
Yeah.
thing that went on that was a process or something,
Mhm.
action.
So let's send the review to Jane. Because
Well, yeah, that's a big positive discipline line.
I think what
Like that's what I latch onto when I think of it. I'm serious.
I think what she
Right?
would, I'm again can't speak for her, but I think what she was intending when she in the workbook that I got that from, when she calls that encouragement, she's putting the emphasis on how the child feels about themselves. She's not saying I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you would be a praising statement, because then it almost puts the focus on the parent and the
But
parent's
she's
experience
telling
as
the child
opposed to the
to be
child's
proud.
experience.
I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
she's saying you must be proud.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if somebody says that to me, it would bother me.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's like, why?
Mm.
I mean, why? Okay, I mean, I'm doing this because I'm doing it
Right.
because of
right.
the process.
So maybe because
So
of
it's a
the
little
must, you
confusing.
must be proud. If you should be proud of yourself. That changes.
What about if you say,
For
how
me-
do you feel about it?
That's
Right.
what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
But
Yeah.
what if
I
they say
understand.
something? Like sometimes I don't know. I'm trying to think of something. They all do something. Like, yeah, and they look to you, and you don't want to say yes, good job, whatever.
Yeah.
So
How do you feel about it?
all right, I've never done that because he's already told me how he's felt about it. He's already said I did this.
Mhm.
So
Well, the way I would change to in that example that you're giving, the way I might change that phrase is to substitute the word must with you seem proud of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
You
I
know?
like that.
You look
because
proud
they
of
they
you seem proud of
themselves
it.
feel that they've done a good job and they're saying it
Yeah.
out loud.
Right,
Correct?
they're showing the pride in some way, and you can acknowledge that they're showing it.
Because you don't.
I-
Right?
I
You don't
think
wanna
that-
not
I think
say-
that would make it an
Yeah.
Is
encouragement.
it a good thing to show the pride?
Yeah. I mean,
Here, I'll
to
give you an
feel- to feel-
example.
if a child is feeling good about something they've done, you feel good about what you did.
I mean, we literally
you
asked
feel
Leo
good.
10 times in the morning, 10 times.
Mm.
I'm not kidding, 10, at least 10, to put his coat on, right? Like, we're going through this whole thing. This morning, he comes up to me and goes, Dad told me to put my coat on, and I did it the first time, and my first instinct was like, well, yeah! Right? But I just,
like daddy tomorrow.
but again, he's like, but I want him to do it again. He said, so I was
Right.
like, great! Like, I don't know what to say, It's like, because I don't want to you know, so it's like, oh, good,
Right.
great.
So-
anytime your dad
You could
asks,
say,
that's awesome.
you could say, you did it yourself.
I mean, he's dead, and I'm like,
Okay,
yeah,
you say like
you
you're
can just
making
repeat.
you're
You can
making
just
your
repeat.
right the
you
right
repeat.
choice.
Okay.
Is that good if you say that? Like
You're making the right choice.
yeah.
I see that as, I would see that as more praise.
Okay.
I could see saying, you did it all by yourself. Oh, you put your coat on by yourself. You know, that is just an acknowledgement of what they've done. I see that as an encouraging statement versus a
Okay,
praising
that's what you
statement.
do. So you
You're
repeat what they
basically
say.
repeating what
Okay.
there's like a
Yeah.
positive reinforcement, right?
So you just repeat it. You don't go, finally.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't do that.
Sometimes
I was
what
so
say
shocked I
is,
said
oh
nothing."
wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Look at
okay.
that.
You can say that?
They show me, you know, and you can see the pride that I know what you mean. I just have a hard time saying you should be proud of yourself.
The pride part is.
Because it's like you're telling them how they should feel.
Right, right.
I mean, and I know they should feel good about themselves, but just even acknowledging that is, oh wow, you know, and the feeling that you have behind that you're sharing that feeling basically. It's just even if you say you
Well-
put the coat by you just repeat what he says, whatever.
I'm just asking. 'cause
Wow.
You're right, because you wow, it's fine. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
Right.
basically.
I don't, like, if they're saying something positive about themselves, they just,
You can share the happiness. I
okay.
mean, and say.
That was a bad example,
Could
but
be
you
the
know what I
go-to
mean.
example. Wow. That's,
Oh,
if you don't know what to say, wow.
That's
Wow.
it. Wow.
There you go.
Right.
Wow. That's easy to remember, right? Wow.
Okay. I
Because
got
that could go on. You can use that in good situations and
Yeah,
bad
oh,
situations.
wow. Yeah, like, wow.
And that buys you a moment to decide what the heck you're doing. You know?
Someone told me to do that once when someone was asking me if they say how's business, just say unbelievable.
Yeah, right.
It goes either way.
It's actually neutral. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's try some of the others.
Ready?
Let's debate some of the others.
How do you feel about it?
That one's
That's
maybe an easier one.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's encouraging, right?
Yeah, that's what
Can't pick it. Yes, encouraging.
Encouraging.
You figured it out for yourself.
That's encouraging.
Encourage.
Encouraging,
Say.
right?
Yeah,
That one's more clear. Yeah.
And you can say, wow. You figure out. You can add a wow.
That's
Wow, you
That's gonna be my
Sometimes
line.
I
You
have to
figured it
say-
out for yourself.
I try to repeat what my kids say. My kids are big kids, right? But anyway, just to do the positive reinforcement or not, just to so they hear that they understand that I'm listening. And then I repeat it, making an effort, thinking, okay, I'm just gonna repeat. I'm not gonna say, any praise or anything, because it's really hard. This part, I think, is one of the most difficult exercises for all of this, at least for me. This one and the fixing and trying to rescue and all that. But and then they would say, I already told you that. That's what I'm saying. Like they think, so it's hard sometimes because you're repeating that. So it doesn't work all the time.
So Marilyn
It
is
doesn't work all the time.
Marilyn is asking a question and say, how about I'm so happy for you?
What do you guys think? I'm so happy
Well,
for you. Praise or
tell them what you
encouragement?
feel.
Yeah, I know. I think it's praise. I that comes out of my mouth a lot because I don't. I need more pause in between the excitement and me to process. So usually something like that flies out of my mouth.
Any other thoughts about that? Encouragement or praise?
I think it's difficult to say that. I don't know how to classify it. Maybe it's praise more than encouragement, but because then if they expect you to say I'm happy for you all the time, every time they do something, they are looking for the external reward.
I know. Yeah.
So it's really tricky.
I also would label that one as praise also, for the reason mostly that it puts the focus on the parent's feelings as opposed to what the child is experiencing. It almost kind of takes away a little bit of the excitement from the child and makes it about what the parent is experiencing. So I'm so happy for you.
So I have another question. When they're painting, for example, and they show, look what I did. Like, do you like it? Like, so I feel like
I
we
get that a
should
lot.
say, like, do you like it? What you did? Is that
Right.
correct to say? Like, instead of they're asking, look what I did, look what I did, and then they ask you, like, do you like my paint?
You say, what do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I answer, because actually in the school, that's one of the principles for the art.
Yeah.
We don't question what they're doing. We don't ask them what they're painting. We don't, I mean, in opposition to what psychologists do, we don't encourage that because of the art itself. We want them to develop the expression without any judgments. And a question sometimes can be, they have to like figure out what they were doing, and maybe they don't even know what they just painted, right? So you're forcing them to give an answer. So we basically don't say anything. But if they come up with that question, then what I would say is, what do you think? And you just throw the ball back to them, basically. Just think about that.
Or
can I say, do you like what you did?
That's it.
yeah, you can throw the question back to them, or you can simply notice something about what they've done. And often I've noticed, because kids often ask that question.
Yeah.
They want to know, you know. And often what something that will satisfy them is saying, not answering their question, but saying, "Oh, I see that you put a swirl here." Or I see how hard you worked, you know, on doing this, you know. So just observe something about what they've done, and that noticing and that acknowledgement is often enough to satisfy what they're really looking for, without you rendering a direct judgment about it. You know, does that make sense? Do you think?
I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
It's very, very fine. There's a line, you know, very fine with the art. You know, people come here and say, "Oh, wow, look what the kids do here." Okay, there's a whole training for that. And one of the things being almost mute about what they do. Because otherwise they don't develop that internal capacity of knowing if they are satisfied with what they did, if they really express what they wanted, and they are looking for somebody always to please. So I would ignore it, actually.
Yeah.
Just pretend they didn't even ask. You know, if your child is constantly asking you, that's because they're all constantly looking for to please you, right?
Yeah.
So we want to at one point ignore that, or ask the question back, and just that. If you're noticing even the tiny thing there, the next day they're gonna ask you again. And then you have to find two things right there. And then also you trigger the intellect in a way that you don't need to do with the arts. In my experience.
I agree with you in large part with regard to artwork. If the question is being asked about something else, you know, not an artistic endeavor but something else, I think maybe then in that case you can
point something out.
Yeah, point something out, exactly. But with art, I get what you're saying in terms of the artistic process really needing to be one that the child has full ownership of.
Yes.
Yeah, because then you grow up into an adult who's still questioning other people, like, "Hey, do you value my work?"
And it's a pretty common question.
When
Like,
you don't do that, you know, I've seen I live in my house with my son, even following him through the public school, and now he's in college doing the artwork. He has developed his criteria of, you know, how much he wants to do and how much he likes it, and it's very impressive to see how he knows that part of his expression, right, in the artistic way. But I was there always, even in the public school, saying, "Okay, turn the paper over, you know, to use the white side of the paper." So like always reinforcing that what he wanted to do was fine, because the rest will tell the kids, you know, to do what the adults want them to do, right? And so just pointing that squirrel part, you know, can make them think, "Okay, that's what I should do tomorrow. I'm gonna make 3 of that."
Right.
You never know how they can think, and
Right.
so it's very
Could you ask them, tell me about this picture, tell me about your picture, tell me about the choices you made, and then I love listening to them when they go through the whole thing about why they did
But
certain
is that
things.
making good to you or to the kids? Because for the kids themselves, for them to develop the artistic part, you know, now we're entering into another workshop, asking them what they did is not going to develop a better expression next time. It's going to trigger the intellect to analyze what they did. And it's going to make you feel happy about whatever they're explaining, but you're encouraging that. So the next day, they want to do it
To
again.
think about
and they
it.
want to...
Got it.
It's different than if they're writing a story and then they're illustrating the story and then they're telling you the whole story, right? It's a different way of sharing the art, but the product is already there. You know, you're not really talking about the picture; you're talking about the story. So it's very tricky and it's not easy to understand that, but we can keep talking about that because I think it's super important for the parents to know how much you can do to protect the artistic expression intact. There's a lot to do, actually, and not to do.
Right, so if I'm hearing you correctly, by doing that, you're, in their mind, you're intellectually intellectualizing it and putting it in a different part of the brain as
Different part.
opposed to their creative
Yeah.
brain, which
The
is
expression
not.
is with colors, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You take the art from being which more right-brained activity, and then you're bringing the left brain into it, and there's so right.
With
we won't
words,
belabor
I mean,
it.
you're
Yeah.
and a poem is also is an artistic expression, but less expressed with words, something else, right?
Right.
With colors, or with whatever we're using for the art, whatever medium, we just have to, I think, let it happen, and then leave it there. If the child says something, of course, you can say, wow.
We're back to wow.
Wow.
This topic of praise obviously is one of the trickiest topics.
It's very
It's
tricky.
very
And-
difficult.
And it's one of the it's one of the most difficult topics to kind of fully wrap your mind around the praise. But I'll wrap up the praise discussion with one thought that I have, which is, for the long term, this is an important issue, I think, for the long term consequences of society, really too. Because if we raise kids on praise, and we raise them to be approval junkies, needing approval constantly, then we're raising a society of people that will not be willing to say or do something that doesn't fit in with what's the accepted status quo.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if we do that, then everybody is towing the PC line, and no one's willing to step out of that, because if they do, they're not going to get the approval that they've grown up needing. And what a scary thing that would be, right?
Yeah.
So,
Fortunately, we
Without
have
going
social
on.
media today that helps encourage.
I think we're seeing the consequences of this already
Yeah.
today. I think we're,
Whole
So.
other tangent.
exactly.
Yeah,
All
it's so
is-
important to speak about the difference, because it's not easy to understand. So you will all take a copy of the chart, so you can think about it for next week when we meet again, and then you have some homework too, right?
Yep. How are we doing on time?
So I was gonna check that. It's 10 to 11.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's okay. We're moving slowly through this, but we'll have time next week. We'll continue next week, with these things. For now, we'll talk a little bit about again, behavior being goal-oriented, and often misbehavior fitting into one of these 4 categories. So these 4 mistaken goals that children have. Again, these mistaken goals are tied to a child's need for belonging and significance and connection, right? So if a child is not feeling encouraged to meet those needs in positive ways for whatever reason, then they might seek to meet those needs for connection, significance, belonging in more negative ways, in one of these 4 specific negative ways. So one would be undue attention, so a child who feels like they're only significant when they are being attended to, cared for, noticed in very direct ways. Misguided power, so a child might think, in order to be significant, I have to be the most powerful. It might be motivated by revenge, the goal of revenge. So in order for me to feel significant, I need to seek revenge for what was done to me just previously, right? This is one that will be reinforced by using punishment, right? You'll be kind of encouraging a child to develop a sense of revenge being the way that they can regain a sense of significance and empowerment. And then assumed inadequacy. So the mistaken belief that in order to be significant and to belong, I have to be the one who doesn't know how to do this, who can't do things for myself, who needs to be taken care of and needs to have things done for me. So kind of the giving up kind of attitude. Well, I don't seem to ever do well enough, so I'll just kind of give up, the assumed inadequacy.
So can I say something? You have a copy of the chart, right?
Mhm.
It's a chart that it's really good if you can study, read everything, and try to understand. Because if a child is misbehaving and you understand what is the goal of the child, then you can see, or you can try to start thinking of how to find the solutions for that. So for example, for the first one, undue attention, in this new chart, Jane added another column. I don't know if you can see because it's a color one. Do you have one, Jason?
Actually, I don't have the new one.
Here, see if you can. It's very small, but so for the first one, undue attention, the child is really, the coded message is notice me, involve me usefully. So you see the column here? So the child, for example, is disrupting the class. I'm just gonna give an example in the school. Disrupting the class, doing something silly, which is silly to get the attention. That's very clear, right? They want the attention. So they're saying actually, notice me, but maybe not to us, maybe to the group in a group setting, right? To the peers. Notice me and involve me. So what we do to prevent the situation from happening, right? Because discipline is based on 90% of the things you can prevent if you think about it before, right? So what we do usually with children that tend to have the attention in a negative way, doing something silly when they're supposed to be focused on the class, for example, is give them a role right away. For example, a leading role in the group. So if you know your child is going to be crying or trying to get attention when you're on the phone, which I'm sure all of them want to do that, right? When you get on the phone, they want to do something to get your attention. Perhaps you can prevent that from giving them something before you are on the phone, something to do that is useful, that will make them feel belonging and significant, right? So, and then if you go through the chart, it will tell you, the tricky part is to identify how they're feeling, right? What's the feeling behind the behavior?
Yeah, that's why I think when you're consulting this chart, the first place to look is the parents' feeling, because that's the thing that you have most immediately. You can access most immediately. You can always focus. You can always tune into, okay, what am I feeling right now, and that will start to give you a clue as to where you are in this chart. So if you're feeling annoyed, irritated, worried, guilty, well, that might be a child whose mistaken goal is undue attention, and then you can kind of look across and follow the chart. If, on the other hand, you're feeling angry, challenged, defeated, well, then maybe you are faced with a child that in this moment is seeking to gain power over you, and maybe you're in a power struggle, with this kid. And so then you can look across, and that will help to guide you. So using your feelings to guide you. The second column,
Second
column, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to recognize how you're feeling.
Yep.
That's right.
We'll have more time to get into the mistaken goals next time, and we'll probably do the mistaken goal activity next time, right?
So this one that you have a copy of is based on the chart, the one that you were trying to do today.
Oh, this one.
The questionnaire.
Yeah.
So you can finish that up at home, and then with the chart, and we can discuss it next week.
Yeah,
So that's
that's
one
a
of
good
the
idea.
homeworks, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
That I went through. Alright, so let's spend the last few minutes, computer's on low battery anyway, so it'll be good timing, to just kind of quickly go through some of the many tools that are included in positive discipline. So, kind and firm, we've kind of talked about. So an example of a kind and firm statement would be. Would you like to give an example of what a kind and firm statement would be? One that's both kind and firm.
Well, for example, something that is also easy to remember, like wow, is I love you, but this is not the time for whatever, right?
Can I jump in for a sec? Can I?
Yeah.
Instead of the word but, I love you, but this is not the time. I love you, and this is not the time.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So really using the word and to reinforce and emphasize this idea
Yes.
of kind and firm. It's not kind but firm. It's not firm but kind.
That's right.
It's
Replacing
both.
the
It's
word.
and. So anytime we use I'll say to you, Laura, you worked really hard on that math test, but you really didn't get the score
You're
that we were
right.
hoping
You don't
for.
wanna
Seems
say
like,
that
but
What does the but do?
It makes
Just
Yeah,
the
it throws
word.
it.
Totally negates
Yeah.
the first part of it. What if I had
No,
said,
you're right.
Laura, you worked really hard on that math test and you didn't quite get the score that you wanted?
It's encouraging.
It's a little bit more encouraging. It's not negating.
Yeah.
It's acknowledging
It's
both.
acknowledging what
You worked
happened.
hard, and yet there's
You're
disappointment.
Yeah.
You know.
Life.
So really replacing, I think as much as possible in our daily language with our kids, replacing buts with ands,
Yeah.
I think can go a long way towards
It's
encouraging.
true.
You know.
Yeah.
To keep in mind.
It just feels
it's-
so natural to say but
It
you're
does.
right.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
you don't
No,
hear it
and
when I'm
even-
saying it,
even-
but hearing it right now, it seems so obvious.
Even to avoid the no, say no, like use another worse instance of no. It's
Instead of
hard.
no. Yeah. I'm glad you said that too.
They don't
Because
hear that.
Yeah.
yeah, as soon as I'll say the word no right now, and I want you to be tuned into kind of what your physical reaction is to no. No. Yes. Did you notice a difference at all?
Yeah.
Can you say something about that? What was the difference that you noticed?
The tone. It was like no, like
What did you notice
like,
in your body actually, or in your reaction? Did you?
I felt like stopped.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that was it.
Yeah, with the no.
Right.
Yes is expansive,
Mm.
like a yay, heart opening, no feels shut down
Right.
Yeah.
and constricted.
Right.
Exactly. No creates automatic constriction. So imagine a child that we are trying to get through to. When we say no to them, we've already pushed them away. They've already constricted. They've already shut down in a way. We've set them up already to, there's a wall there, you know? So not that we can't or shouldn't set limits, because we absolutely need to set limits, but the way we do it and the words we use are going to be really important. So, sometimes even with my son, he'll say something to me, he'll be asking me, or he'll be reporting on some sequence of events, and he'll report some of the details of it wrong, and he'll want to know, is that what happened? Am I saying it right or whatever? I wish I could think of a more concrete example, but my initial reaction sometimes is to correct by saying, no, that's not really how it was, this is how it was. But I've started to realize I can correct without saying the no.
Yeah.
I can correct, I can say, I just don't have to use the word no. I can say the same statement I would have said, but without the no in the beginning of it,
Yeah.
So I can say, I can't think of an example, but go, yeah.
I was gonna say an example that I work on flipping all the time is exactly what you said. Say what you want as opposed to what you don't want. So let's say with my boys, if you eat dinner, then we can go to the park or we can go play outside, as opposed to if you don't eat dinner, we're not going to the park.
Right.
It's just say
Oh yes,
flip
and
it
it
to
was
the
Yeah.
focusing on the
Right.
positive. So
Right.
whatever you would say no to, you can just as easily say yes to something else.
Right.
There's there's very little need to say no or but.
You
Right.
say
In
when,
life.
you can also use when and then, which we've
Yeah.
used here before in our workshops too a lot, right? That's easy to remember. When you do this, then.
Yes, right.
But most of our parents trained us with the no out of love for us, trying to protect us, trying
Yeah.
to get us to do it right, what's right, but they didn't have this training.
Mhm.
And so for us, it's like having
It's
to
like pretty common.
flip our thought process.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's really easier once you are in the yes.
Right.
And
Right.
it's just so frustrating for a kid when you just say no, no to everything. It's
Yeah.
just, it changes
don't hear
completely.
anymore.
Yeah, they don't hear, and
And it's very
it's-
frustrating.
yeah.
For anyone. right?
So, Mommy, can I have ice cream now? No, you can't have ice cream. Mommy, can I have ice cream now? Oh, you really want ice cream, and it's not the time for ice cream right now. So you really want it. So you're
Acknowledge
Yes.
acknowledging their desire, which is fine. You're not saying, because as soon as you say no, especially very young children, they can't really distinguish between, are you saying no to the specific situation, or are you saying no to me and what I want and what my desire is and what my intention is, right? So no, you can't have ice cream to a very young child may sound like you are disapproving of the want and the desire for ice cream, right?
Yeah,
So
totally
I think no's are much more powerful than we realize. So acknowledging, yes, you want ice cream, and it's not time for ice cream right now. That's kind and firm, right? It's not punitive, it's not negating, it's not shutting down, and you're being firm that this is not time for ice cream. So that's an example of a kind and firm. Yeah.
There's, for example, there are other files here that I can send by email to, helpful hints for empowering versus enabling. So, I mean, I'm just finding more stuff here that we can discuss next class. If you want, I can email them to you and then you can read them. I don't know if you look. And there is something very interesting in the last version of her book, which I just finished listening. She adds about adults' personalities and how parents' personalities affect children.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain a little bit more about that next
Sure.
class.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah.
The lifestyle priorities and what affects some parents more than others. And it depends on the personality we have. Right?
We'll finish up with this last slide. We'll just run through these briefly before we stop. Focus on solutions, not punishment. We've kind of covered that a little bit already, and we'll talk more about that. So a child has done something, created a mess, so, spilled milk because they were horsing around or whatever, or spilled paint or whatever. Rather than punish for the spilling of paint, there's paint on the floor. What can we do about this? So asking curiosity questions and encouraging solutions. Coming up with solutions rather than simply punishing, the behavior. What could we use to clean this up? Or, how, what do you, what could you do to clean this up? Family meetings, we'll talk more about next time also. Limited choices, right? So an encouraging thing to do is to give kids choices, but not too many choices. Give them just enough. So Liam is 3.5. I sometimes give them a choice between two things. Would you like to eat this or this? Would you like to put on your froggy boots or would you like to put on your black sneakers? So he's feeling like, he's somewhat in control of his choices, but he's not overwhelmed by too many choices also,
And as they grow, they will say, well, but I want to do this, right? And it's fine that you tell them that's not an option. You have to.
Yeah.
You have to set the limits and be firm, and you're being respectful, and you're saying that's not an option.
Right. And then something we'll probably talk more about next week also is establishing routines. This is part of what you were alluding to earlier, is that putting in the work ahead of time so that in the moment you're not having as many of the power struggles because the expectations have been set ahead of time. And you're not having to do as much of the reminding because the routine is set. So what should be happening right now? Or what happens after we have breakfast? Or now that you have your coat on, what's the next thing that we do before we leave the house? So if the routine has been in place, then the routine kind of does some of the work for you. And we'll talk more next time about that.
And for older kids, it's good, even for younger kids, that they make the chart themselves.
Yes, yeah.
With if they cannot write yet, they can use pictures and then have something graphic there for them in the kitchen or whatever. So then they can look. If they came downstairs to have breakfast, but they are not dressed yet, you can just, you put the power into the piece of paper. That's what you do basically. So the chart is telling them, oh, look, you skipped this step. Right? For little kids, it works too, because you're not saying that you are the one telling them. The chart is there.
Yeah.
Will we do that next time? Is that next week, working on the chart?
Well, it could be a homework. If you want to do it as a homework with your kids, like if there is a routine chart for the morning, then have them develop the steps, when it's a calm atmosphere, not in the morning before. And they could do it with words or with pictures, and then practice it. Maybe that could be another homework, right? You had a couple
We have
other
a bunch of homework
too.
already. I don't want to take you guys.
You have more there, right?
But you have an interest in talking more about charts and kind of how to do that?
I do, but I'm not going to be able to come next week. And
Okay.
I'm disappointed because this was great.
But you can
We're going to
access
be
the
on
talk
live.
We'll record
on Facebook.
So so you can ask questions if you are somewhere where you can
Okay.
watch it live.
Yeah, if you're watching it live, you can tune in with questions, or even if you're not able to watch it live, you can afterwards you can get the still watch it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you can still watch it because
Okay.
we'll save it
Okay.
and post it on YouTube too.
So
I have to get to an appointment. I'm sorry to leave.
Yeah.
so I'll just circle back on the homework.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the time
Okay.
very much. I just got to drive up to Bergen County. I'm going to be caught in traffic
Okay.
for a little bit. So thank you very much.
Are you able to come next Monday, you think? Will you?
I'm not sure, either Marianne or myself.
Okay.
It just depends on work schedules.
Okay.
But thank you very much.
Thank you
And
so
it's
much for
certainly going
coming.
to
Thank
stimulate
you.
our conversation.
Coffee.
Oh, sure.
Should we give him
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just give you this before you go.
Fine, just
You're going right now.
Yeah.
Just quick.
because I can always follow.
Here you go. Here's 1,
Thank you.
2.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
We
sure.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
We need all the help we can get.
Okay, so why don't we sign off for the people online? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
tune in
And thank
next
you,
week.
Jason.
Sure.